So I promised you on January 1st that I was not going to live with chaos in my life anymore, or do my best not to live with chaos in my life. Here's what I've figured out. You can't really control the chaos in your life. The chaos in your life has control of itself. But what I can control is my response to the chaos. And so in light of that, and in honor of the fact that I want to bring you with me on this journey into peacefulness, I want to continue this whole thread that we started on January 1st of creating sacred practices focused on healing. Now remember, I talked to you guys a lot about Richard Rohr and about Brene Brown, right? I listen to their stuff and I read their things. I highly recommend. There's some amazing things that they both have written and said, and so I encourage you to spend a little time with that. But here's what Richard Rohr says: the supreme task of the church is what? Healing. Stephen was listening on January 1st. Or he's the only one that can remember something for 30 days. I don't know. Healing, right? The supreme task of the church is healing. Now, it's February now. It's not January anymore. And we are moving quickly along into this year. It's already 36 days down. 10% of the year is already gone. February 22nd, which is 17 days from now, is Lent. And then 45 days later is Easter. All right? I want you to be mindful of what's happening right now, because before you know it, it'll be then. But I don't want us to miss what's going on right now. So let's talk about what healing is. All right? Healing is the recovery of a broken or absent relationship. That's healing. Healing is being able to come to a place in your life where you're at peace, no matter what injury or insult or trauma that you have endured. Healing is it's a recovery of our relationship with God. It's also a recovery of our relationship with ourselves and with each other. Healing is our supreme task as a congregation. It should be, and what I want for it to be for us, is our supreme task for us individually as well. But remember, we talked about healing happens through three things: forgiveness, which we talked about on January 1st, reconciliation, which we will talk about today, and peacemaking, which we will talk about next week. And those are three very similar words, but very different in their meanings. So I want you to remember these things about forgiveness, right? Okay, this is a review again. There's going to be a test. Forgiveness, you start with yourself. Why do you start with yourself? Because you can't really forgive somebody else if you haven't forgiven yourself. You can say that you did, but until you're at a place in your heart where you can forgive yourself as well, it's hard to do that. It's very hard to do that. Forgiving yourself is found in sacred time with God. How many of you have, in your lives, have set aside some sacred time every day to spend with your Lord? That's good. That's good. All right? 10 minutes. Start with 10 minutes. Start with 5 minutes. While you're standing brushing your teeth, which should be for 2 minutes, by the way. The American Dental Association says 2 minutes. All right? Talk to God. Spend some sacred alone time with God. Begin to make that a habit in your life on your way to forgiving yourself. Forgive others is number 2, right? So forgive yourself, forgive others. Because remember, we are always looking at something that is God's beloved. Always. Now, I'm not talking to you about forgive and forget, because I know you, you're human, just like me. I'm talking to you about forgive and let go. Forgive and release. because we don't forget things, right? Well, we forget the important things. Like I was supposed to announce last week that Joe and Joe are getting married. I forgot all about that. So now you only have 5 days notice. But we never forget when we're hurt or when we're wrong, do we? It's because our body releases these chemicals called neurotransmitters that make us remember things that hurt us emotionally and physically. And so it's hard to forget when you've been wronged. So I'm not asking you to forgive and forget. I'm asking you to forgive it and let go. And so as a church, if our supreme task is healing, healing begins with forgiveness. All right, so let's talk about reconciliation next then. Reconciliation is the next step in creating a space for healing. So to reconcile means to make friendly again, to restore harmony or balance. There's a website I refer to quite frequently. It's called BibleStudyTools.com. If you're ever in the position where you need to write a sermon or teach a Sunday school class or anything, it's a great website, BibleStudyTools.com. And here's what it says. Reconciliation is defined as the restoration of friendly relations. In the Bible, reconciliation involves a change in the relationship between God and man, or God and humans, or humans and humans. Reconciliation, now listen to this, okay? This is important. Reconciliation assumes that there has been a breakdown in the relationship, but now there has been a change from a state of enmity and fragmentation to one of harmony and fellowship. And that's reconciliation. Now, the other definition of reconciliation, and Harry, this is for you, is the act of comparing two things and balancing them against each other. For example, balancing your checkbook, what you say you've spent, against what the bank says you've spent. Now, it's been my experience the bank rarely makes mistakes, and I often do. So reconciling your resources against your budget, that's another way to reconcile. But our personal healing and our efforts to create a space where others can heal, it requires that we restore harmony, that we focus on reconciliation. The other thing it requires, and I want you to look at the front of your bulletin, is that the one seeking to reconcile must do more than the one being invited into reconciliation. Do you see in the illustration? That poor man on the right, he's got a serious long arm. But usually with reconciliation, most of the time, it is rarely spontaneous. It is rarely equal. It is one person doing more, reaching out further, expending more energy to invite another person back into relationship. And so there are things that we need to reconcile in our lives. First of all, reconciling our relationship with God. Colossians 1:21 and 22 says, "Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But now God has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in God's sight without blemish and free from accusation." I want you to notice two things about that passage. First of all, it says, you were alienated from God and you were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. It didn't say there that God thought you were his enemy or God thought you were God's enemy. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that you were alienated from God because God walked away. It says that in your mind, because of your evil behavior, you believe that you are alienated from God. But then look what it says next. It says God has reconciled us by Christ. God has brought us back into relationship through Christ. So who's the one who's reaching out further and expending more energy to be in relationship? It's not us, right? It's God. God reached across that chasm that we created because we thought that our evil behavior had created a gap between our relationship and our Creator. And that's not true. But to reach us, God extended everything across that gap that we created to restore our relationship. Now, we're human. We're human. Me most of all. And we turn our backs on God for a multitude of reasons. We create these chasms. We get our spirits all in a wad. We get all dusted up about things, disgruntled. We take our eyes off our Savior and we turn our backs on God for a while. But even when we turn away, God never does. And when Jesus said on the cross, "It is finished," well, that's not just a dramatic end to a traumatic story, folks. Those are the words of our Savior, and He meant what He said. It's finished. It's done. The reconciliation between us and God is taken care of. All we have to do is participate. So the next way to reconcile then is with yourself. Now, I know this sounds crazy, and I tell you that. You have to forgive yourself. You have to reconcile with yourself. But you know who your biggest enemy is? Who your greatest critic is? You know, right? You're looking back at that human every day in the mirror. You're talking to that human all day long, telling you, "Mary, you wasted a whole other day and you didn't go to the gym. What a slacker you are." You're telling yourself, "Mary, why did you eat that Oreo instead of that apple?" Well, because it tastes better, that's why. Because you don't have to peel an apple. Oreos never get rotten in the package. But we do. We terrorize ourselves. And we create this self-talk in our head that is constantly criticizing us. And so how do you create a friendly environment with yourself? Well, I happen to have the answer for you. You practice something called loving kindness. Now, loving kindness is a covenantal loyalty to yourself. It's saying to that human in the mirror, "I promise to love you today. I promise not to criticize you today. I promise not to degrade you or belittle you. I promise to support you today. I promise not to sacrifice you today. I promise to love you today." It means taking all our traumas and our heartaches and our failures and balancing them against grace. Now, Brene Brown says that grace means that all of your mistakes now serve a purpose instead of feeding shame. When we aren't reconciled with ourselves, we feel shame in the mistakes that we make. But when we are reconciled with ourselves, we recognize that we are sacred and holy creations. We remember those mistakes and we give ourselves grace. Because we can't forgive and forget with ourselves either. We have to forgive and release. And then finally, how do you reconcile with another human or a group of humans? Well, the New Testament is full of instructions. Further in the book of Colossians, Paul writes, "Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you." Reconciliation begins with forgiveness. Hebrews in chapter 12 says, "Make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy." And then in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus tells those gathered there, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled to them, and then offer your gift. Does anybody need their check back? We're going to take communion in a little while, and one of the things that Paul writes about communion is that before we take communion, if there is something between us and our brother or our sister or our sibling, we need to reconcile that. Now that's a tall order. Because some of you have been carrying hurts for years, decades. You've been carrying those wounds around that someone else inflicted on you most of your lives. And so what I'm telling you is that reconciliation, it's not a one and done thing. You can't go to somebody and say, hey, I'm so sorry. I love you. And I've messed up terribly and I would like to restore our relationship. You don't just do that one time. You have to perform this act of reconciliation over and over and over again. Even if you can't remember why you're mad. Because when something happens in your life and stirs up those old feelings and your body remembers those chemicals that were released when you suffered that trauma, when something happens to stir up those feelings, you're going to find yourself either forgiving and reconciling again, or you're going to be right back in that trauma. And so you have to do it over and over and over. Because feeling those things all over again, that's not good for you. Anger and resentment, those things release chemicals in your body that are killing you. And those are a message from your body, hey, stop. Stop. Release these things. Breathe. Because to be truly healed, one must forgive and reconcile repeatedly. And then to create a space for healing, which is our supreme task, right? That's the supreme task of this congregation, to create a space for healing. Forgiveness and reconciliation must be performed over and over and over again. What time is it? 11:20. I just wanted to know, because this next part of the sermon is for me. Now, you can listen in if you want to, but this is for me. Today, as we're meeting, folks, thank you, Stephen, making sure I can see this clock. You see, let me just show you, because, you know, a joke this good shouldn't go unnoticed, right? Stephen, yeah. Have you seen this, right? There's a clock over there. There's a clock here. There used to be a young man that would sit right here. Jim Goodwin would sit right here in the front. And when I started to go too long, he would raise his hand, right, just like this, so I could see his watch, like he was pledging allegiance. And he would just start to do this if I was going on too long. Yeah, Jim's in another church now. So anyway, this next part of the sermon, this is for me, because let me tell you guys what's going on today while we're here, loving on each other and hugging on each other and kissing on each other. There are more churches voting whether or not to stay in fellowship with the United Methodist Church. Last week, I asked you all to pray for the churches in Azle, both disaffiliated. There is no United Methodist official presence in the city of Azle, Texas. Now, those folks that have lost their church home, including 2 pastors who voted to stay, they're going to start their own new church. And so we're going to be praying for them, and we're going to be offering resources to them, and whatever they need to get started, we're going to help them. Anybody I don't know how we're going to do it. They're looking for musicians, but they can't have ours. But we'll figure out something. We'll help them hire a tenor or something. I don't know. Anyway, so I preach these sermons, and man, sometimes they convict me. Because to me, what I heard today is that there's going to come a point in my life where I'm going to have to be reconciled with the Global Methodist Church and with others who have left this congregation. I'm going to have to be reconciled with those people that have told me my whole life that I was an abomination. I went to a seminar a few weeks ago called Stay UMC, and one of the things they focused on was maintaining relationships with those folks who were leaving and blessing them and offering them peace and love as they began their own journey. And I struggled with it. I was so mad. I was so mad. Because what they've asked me to do is to count the trauma that this splintering has caused so many of my friends and the trauma it's creating in my own heart. And then I'm supposed to count all these years of trauma that have been inflicted by everyone who wasn't part of the Caucasian patriarchy. Because it's not just the LGBTQ folks that have been oppressed. It's black folks, it's women, it's people of color, people of all colors, it's people with no bank accounts. And so reconciliation means that I have to count all of that and I have to balance it against grace. I have to get to a place in my life where I can look back and I can recognize that it served a purpose. And I'm not there yet. Obviously, I'm not there. And so I'm asking you to pray for me because it's hard for me to talk about that. But here's the truth. The truth of the gospel is that Jesus decided the way we should love each other, not me. And Jesus decided the way we should forgive each other. We have to love each other the way He loves us, which is with everything. We can't hold anything back. And we have to forgive each other the same way. And at some point in my life, sooner than later, I hope, because it's not good to hold on to trauma and to hurt. But at some point in my life, I'm going to have to reach out my arm and pray that it stretches across that gap so that I can be reconciled with those folks. Hopefully by then they'll have, a light bulb will have come on or something. But maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe the best I can do is reach across and love them. Either way, part of creating a healing space is reconciliation. Pray with me, please. Lord of fierce compassion, you name the forces of death in our hearts and institutions and even in the holy places. Lord, lift from us the canopy of fear that feeds on repression and pushes away what it cannot abide. Go with us to dark and lonely places where we can learn again who we are called to be through Jesus Christ, the healer of creation. And all the people said, amen.